from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
We're rolling.
All right, you want to start?
Yep.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So this is the 11th.
Okay, so marker, today is Thursday, April 11th, 2013. We are in Los Angeles, California, recording on behalf of the Southern Oral History Program at UNC Chapel Hill, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Library of Congress. The interviewer today is David Cline. Our videographer is John Bishop, and we are here with Mr. Ben Caldwell. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of our project.
Well, excited about the prospects of this museum in Washington, D.C. I lived there for about 3 years and taught at Howard and worked at the Smithsonian with Bernice Reagan and them, and got to meet Mr. Alan Lomax at our house and talk about the blues with a good friend of mine who, Mr. Barlow, Dr. Barlow, who was the doctor of the blues, WPFW, and so he used to have that every night. So he would bring through all these phenomenal blues musicians and people. So I felt pretty blessed in that I was able to put my ethnographic hat on, you know, and really meet a lot of people in those ways. So it was really pretty fun time in my life.
How about Worth Long? Did you meet him too?
Yes, I met Worth Long. Now, Mr. Worth Long and them I met in Philadelphia. And also in Flaherty Film Seminars. And I got to see the land where the blues was born, and was really blown away by it because it was, you know, I'm from New Mexico, and my father was a foreman on the train line, and so I was around a lot of that work music that you guys documented in the land where the blues was born. So just that lining up the trains and and then just including all that kind of stuff that was the environmental sounds with the music itself was really showed me, because that's the work, the kind of world I was around as a kid. I worked so to start out with my life, my grandfather and my mom and a whole family set were migrant farmers. And my grandfather was a kind of a lighter-skinned black man, and he could pass as a Latino when he wanted to. So he worked in Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and then their migratory pattern was always that following the lines to Bakersfield here.
Where was he born originally?
Texas. Texas was the part of the life that they were from. And they traveled with, it was 2 men and a woman, and they could do everything. They could build houses. I was very empowered with my grandfather's capacity to do things, and he didn't even have a formal education. He bought up a lot of property in the town that he settled in, and the only reason he settled is his tent burned down. And they had to stay there in that town, and they figured out how to make it work. And so a lot of my grandfather, I find, as I get older, is a lot in me, because he was my babysitter, and he was a power broker, because I remember walking behind him, meeting the mayor, and I had real clear access to going to City Hall and just walking there as a baby. I can just still, so that whole parts of a small town and accessibility and things like that, I was able to see. Also the dichotomy, my grandfather was a projectionist, and he projected in a town that had the Latinos separated from the whites, so there was a Latino theater that he projected at, and then he would run across the street and then project at the white theater, and then there was a specific place at the time where blacks only kind of had to be at the top in the balcony.
Where was that?
In Deming, New Mexico. And Deming, I started doing just research the last few years of my life, these last few years, it's been really pretty interesting to deal with the concept of that town because it was named Deming. It was named Deming after the folks, the Crocker family. And the Crocker family, maiden, the woman who married them, her maiden name was Deming. And Deming, New Mexico was the border between Mexico and the U.S. Before the Guadalupe Hidalgo. So our part of that world was quite unique. So it was Guadalupe Hidalgo. It was the last mainland part of the United States that came in, and that Pancho Villa, Geronimo, Cochise, the Butterfield Trail, all those things kind of ran through our town, which is pretty interesting. And that it was airplanes were first used in war, general Pershing. And
do you think the fact that it's such a sort of a border place where things are in flux and, you know, being defined in that way had an influence on how you grew up?
I think so, because I was at the crux of a crazy place of change, you know, and there was a lot of stories. You know, it was just a whole lot of stories. If we just went out in Boy Scouts, the stories were these Indian. So our guy was almost my scoutmaster was like an ethnographic studier. You know, he was a geologist in ways because we'd go out and he was like, this is where the Cochise and the military would fight, and at this pass, and so he would, you know, I dream about it, and then, you know, this is the way that Geronimo was able to live in the desert, and because we had those types of things around us, and, you know, Pancho Villa and Zapata were the Latino people that they really liked him a whole lot, and so and then my grandfather was a baseball fanatic, and so he had a colored team. So he had Indians, Asians, blacks, all playing throughout the Southwest as a baseball team. So there was that kind of bomb storming and I was their little bat boy and stuff, you know. So I got that kind of environment. So, yeah.
Who would they play against?
They play against other colored groups. You know, there was this whole circuit that they had that were semi-professionals, and it was a part of before they became, you know, when they were really segregated. So it was the tail end of all that segregated time period that I was able to see.
That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
So this would be throughout the Southwest? Or,
yeah, because let's see, my grandfather's pattern would be Texas, up to northern New Mexico, and then what would be eastern Arizona. So that was their playing pattern, and they had their own designations of what the different levels were. Mm-hmm. And then after some of our guys would then go to the semi-pro leagues and then, you know, kind of work themselves up, and you know, it was fun to watch them pretty famous. You know, they were famous within their own world. You know, come in after church, someone would like be dressed up in a suit still, and, you know, because they're late on time, you know, late before, but the game's got to start, and just be, you know, like the pitcher. I remember the pitcher coming out with, you know, like with his tie on, tucking it around his neck, and then coming and like throwing the shit so hard. You know, it was just a kind of a fun environment to see these men. The other part of my life that was interesting is really, to me, is that I was a designated driver for my father. But my father was an interesting man because he was a foreman. That's how he got to New Mexico, and he was a highly intelligent man. You know, he was like born in Des Moines, Iowa. His family was middle class. He went to church. You know, he went to Catholic schools and all that, and got all the way up to college, and went to Marquette University.
Yeah.
And so he was that kind of a cat, and living in that type of a world, which was, you know, with mostly migrant folks and, you know, kind of pioneering types, because people who migrated to New Mexico were people who were just pioneers. You know, they just went out and struck out on their own. And so I got to see the blues being made by really everyday people, you know, so got to see that. And was really pretty impressed. And storytellers, I got to meet some really phenomenal storytellers, the ones that did the signifying monkeys and all that kind of stuff, and got to hear that live and well, and was really blown away with it as a kid, because I remember trying to describe it, but then the closest I could come was, that one that Disney did with Uncle. That's what Uncle Remus said.
Yeah.
But these cats were like, they would drink and, like grab a rattlesnake. And really, I saw a guy grab a rattlesnake and kill the motherfucker while he was telling the story. So it was that kind of realness around my life, So he's telling signifying monkey, and then this sidewinder comes up, and then he's like, grabs it, and then like, and then me as a kid, I was like, oh, how fantastic. That's a storytelling and a half there. But
he was a foreman in what industry?
In the railroad line, yeah. And that was the other thing I looked up in my life. I lived some of my formal life in a boxcar, so it was kind of like a boxcar. I remember having those first steps that made of metal, grabbing my arms, going up the chair, up to to get into the boxcar, and pretty impressed about, so that was part of my life. So that's the early life, and then...
You said you were a designated driver
for my dad. Yeah, that was by the time I turned 16. But I think that the whole thing on civil rights, the thing that I really, in New Mexico, it was a real cusp of change there, because at that time, like I was saying, they had things that were still segregated because the Latinos had their thing, and then there was whites and blacks together on the theater level.
And just interrupt, what year were you born?
In 1945.
1945, so we're talking about when you're saying that, those times.
50s, early 50s, from 45, yeah, because it was like, since he babysitted me for the early parts of my life, so I would say from 1945-ish till 1955-ish is where I spent the greater part of like kicking it with him, part in 10 years, for those 10 years. And then later our family still got engaged with the theater, because then my grandfather then projected for the drive-in movies, so he was a part of that too. And so we could go and see those. So I was always around the kind of movie world and all its manifestations, Never thought it would be a part of my life, so just the whole thing of how it happened to me later. But let's see, so school. My first days of school were really pretty interesting, because I had learned to actually, I was a pretty free running kid because it was a free space, and so the first days of school, when they had recess and things, I disappeared. And then they found out that I was leaving and going home, because I was like, why is everybody sleeping? I'm not sleepy. And so I'm like, I'll just go. And so I just went home. And so they discovered that I was going. And so I stayed. My first recess was after I'd been in school for about a week or two. And then all the kids all of a sudden noticed that I was there, because they had done this kind of, what do they call it, when they cut places up and only make it like they had the Latinos all in one school, and it segregated the place. And then they made Smith School only for whites, and I happened to be one block on this side of the track instead of one block on the other. And so I showed up at school, and it kind of like freaked them out. And so the whole...
In an all-white school.
In an all-white school, so I was the only black person in an all-white school, and it happened through just the line. I happened to be on one side of the railroad track instead of this. And so when I showed up, the school freaked out. And the kids started throwing rocks at me and throwing dirt and just being pretty, just like living their parents' life on me. And so I then ran. And then later I learned to fight for myself, because my cousin was watching me, and he looked at me kind of like evilly, like, what, you're not just running from these, you know how to fight, we taught you how to box and stuff. And so I just turned around. And then the funniest thing I still remember is that they says, "Oh, you fight like a nigga and you kick like a Mexican." I says, "Definite, what? Come with it." And so from then on, I was a jock. I learned how to play football, and I would run over all those kids that really meant me harm. And I found out how to do it with gusto, and I became a jock. And so my next 12 years was really pretty cool in New Mexico.
Did that earn you some sort of status or respect then?
Very much so. The whole thing, even throughout, because you know it's pioneering people, and they ride horses and bronco bulls, and the whole way that they lived was very rough and ready. And I liked those guys. You know, they were fun friends of ours. And my grandfather was a Brahma bull. He liked the Brahma bulls and all that whole world. And so we'd watch that. So we had friends that were in the kind of cowboy rodeo world too. But with those folks, we just found the same thing. I had to teach my brothers the same thing as they grew up, is that, you know, as long as you stood up for yourself, they respect you. And so that was the thing that each of them, and so it was funny, my youngest one, we were talking about it as I grew up, maybe we should, let's pull the door.
Let me just stop the tape. We're going again.
Sure.
Okay. I guess I was just talking about that early life of mine.
I mean, were there other black families in the town?
Yeah, there was about 150 blacks in the town on a constant basis. And they were mostly migrant people, really wonderful people, very down to earth. They treated my family really well. We always got a kind of a real, people treated us nice. All of our family, you know, like the black neighborhoods really treated us really like royalty. They treated us very nice, you know. They liked my father. He was a highly intelligent man. We were a whole family, and we're a proud family. Oh, that sounds like a serious wreck, huh?
Yeah, we better stop and see what's.
I'll just start with after. That was kind of my child life, and then
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
About that? Because you started to talk about passing these lessons on to your brothers.
Right.
Yeah. And you didn't really
Okay. Yeah. And with my brothers, what was interesting is each of them had to deal with this idea of the pioneering white man. How do you deal with that and their idea of what a black male is, you know, and so. Part of what my father taught first was the sense of pride, as you know, and you all stand up for each other, and kind of thing. And then my sister, we had one sister too, and she was the same kind of person. So we didn't stand for the N-word. It was like you say it, and before you knew it, your head was off. You know, that was our first concept. And my father was very much that type of a person. He really did not like kowtowing to people because of race. You know, he didn't stand for it a little bit, and he didn't want us to ever be that kind of a person. So that was the way we were taught, is like, you're a man just like everybody else. And that really helped us a lot in the pioneering towns, because
But that meant you had to keep proving that, I would imagine.
Well, you only have to do it per generation. It's like they'll test the Caldwell the next one and see if you stand up like your brother did and stuff like that. And then the process of if they did whip you, then they had to deal with your other brothers, you know. So that kind of thing is part of what we had as a kind of a family, a group of boys. And girl, because my sister was as strong as any of the guys that were around. And so, for instance, my brother and I were talking, and I was like, because I got drafted, so my youngest brother was like 4 or 5 years old when I first, he was about 8, 9, 10 years old. And then so when I came back, he was about to go from junior high to college, and I mean high school in those days. And so anyway, so I was not around his life for about 8 years, and so he came and lived with me in DC, and so we were just discussing, you know, like, how did you deal with that incident when you had to deal with the cowboys, you know, so, and because they would, so he was like, oh yeah, that was a time when we went, you know, because what would happen is they would go to the dry riverbed and have kegs of beer, and it was like a roundup, you know, really a lot of fun, and people just had fun. And so he found himself in the middle of all that. And he's like, and then they all turned and was like, oh, there's a, and he was like, oh, we're gonna whip your ass, you know, kind of thing. And so he's like, I says, well, then what did you do? He says, I looked at the biggest one and I said, I'm gonna knock the fuck out of him, and if he doesn't fall, I'm gonna run. He says, thank God I hit him, and he fell down, and they're like, ah, you're a good man. Here, you want a damn beer? You know, and that was just the way our life was. You had to really stand up for yourself and prove it, you know, and then people really respect you after that. So that was just an example. Another is like the difference between the two worlds is like, when some of my brothers came to see me here in California, they have a different way that police deal with you here, you know, and so I told them they had to really, really chill. So they left, you know, because they really left and went back home. And then when they were home,
Meaning if you stood back up with that kind of self-respect?
You would die, yeah, you would die, they would kill you, you know, and so I was like, you better just really chill when you're here. And so they moved back home. And so when they went back home, one of the cops from New Mexico jumped on Michael, he's one of my brothers that don't really stand for any kind of shit. And so they were going upside his head with a stick. And then my sister grabbed the police and then attacked the police, and they both beat him up, the cops, you know. But in our hometown, because of how we were respected, we knew the judge. The judge then talked to them and says, "Come on, the guy went to school with them, and you know, so it just balanced out." So, whereas if it was here, they would have been dead or in prison still, you know. And so that's just and so in that town we could live just like normal people because it was a normal. I mean, what I mean by normal is nobody gets anything over anybody, but if you treat everybody right, you can be treated just like a regular American without that kind of onus that ends up, because that would have normally messed up our family forever, because the two of them would have been in prison.
Right. But that's not to say that racism isn't there.
Oh no, it was still there, and it would have, and to other black kids, it's there. You know, but for our family, because of how we treated everybody and how we were respected, we were able to pass through that, because, you know, there were other kids that would have, that if they had done the same thing, yeah, they would have been in prison, because they were black. But we were lucky enough, for some reason, to be respected enough to have that as a foible. And so I thought that was a very good example of how we were as a family and respected in that town.
And then you carried that with you when you went on to college then?
Throughout the world, yes, from then on, because even when I was in the Army. So that was when I first left home. I'll tell the pictures better. And this is when and it has a little bit of music because it works better for me. And so this is my mom and dad. And then these early pictures of me and my brothers, the four big ones as we call ourselves. And so I first started video. My first stills were there. This is me as a young man in Vietnam. And so I started, and these are the first photographs that I ever took as a kid, you know, the 21-year-old. And so after being in that whole film world, the thing that was...
Did you go straight from high school to being drafted?
Yeah, well, I had about 6 months in an art school. I went to Arizona School of Art, and they drafted me out of the art school because it was an art school, not a four-year school. And so I was at a Disney school there in Arizona. And then this is a picture of my sister. And I came back and just started shooting my family and the Arizona environment and the black people that were in it. And so I thought that I would make that my job, is to really see, and because I was noticing the tonalities and the sense of color in the skin, this self-portrait of our skin was similar to the earth that was in the desert, and our skin rolled up like the bushes. And so there was a kind of an interesting look that our skin had in relationship, especially in black and white. So I started playing around with the images in that manner. And
this was after Vietnam?
Yeah, this is right after Vietnam.
Did Vietnam influence you think, in the way that, in terms of looking at the world, how you look at the world?
It made me not look at the world with a veil. You know, that veil was pulled off, and my religiousness disappeared too, because at that time they asked us to kill people, the preachers. They were like, and I asked them straight ahead, "Jesus, like, it's all right to kill?" And they were like, "Yeah." I'm like, damn. You know, I was like, I don't know if I like you guys anymore, you know, because you're not saying what we were taught, you know, and you know, do unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and this is Caesar shit, you know, and the things to God is positive things, and I got to also see in the war zone that there were real humans there, you know, and we were only able to kill them because we made them the other. And I saw a lot of similarities with the other and me, you know, and I was the other in the United States, and they're having me chase down others over here. And I was
going to ask, I saw some images there of Vietnamese.
Yeah, and those Vietnamese ladies, young women, they kind of were following me. It was weird, because I would see them in a lot of different places, and you notice there were like 2 of them in each picture, and it tripped me out how each place, and then they would say, "Ben, I know you." You know, so it fucked with me as a 21-year-old. I don't know what in the world you guys, how can you know me? I just met me. You know, but they were like, "I know you." I'm like, okay. And they were fun. They were Montagnards. And Montagnards are the black people of that world. So it was kind of interesting to see that. The other thing politically, I got to see, I read Malcolm X there. And I saw a lot of similarities between his life and mine, because he was raised in the Southwest, and he had that Cline thing around him, and all the kinds of strifes and tribulations, like even his dad. My dad was that kind of a person, even though he wasn't a Garveyite, but he was really definite revolutionary, you know, in the sense of fighting for his life. And that always has bothered me, when you're proud of yourself, that's considered revolutionary, you know. And so that's the kind of dichotomy to me, is like, I've never understood that why me being prideful of my family and the people I'm from, but not to the point that it's arrogance, just pride, you know, that's seen as being militant, because that's something that I've always been, is just prideful. I don't hate one culture over the other. I can get along with them, but I feel I'm equal to any other culture that meets me, you know. And I can point to my bad sides, and I can point to our high sides too, of the high cultures that we've created and things that we're a part. It may not be here now, but it was a part of the culture, and it meant a lot to the cultures that emulated it, you know. And so that's the way I see it, you know. So I've never, and my family has always pushed us like that, you know. It's just, you know, you know, be prideful of who you are and carry yourself in a manner, therefore, you know. So
what was the world of the Army like?
The Army,
coming out of where you came out of, in this very small town, and then thrust into perhaps I don't know if it's a different kind of a racial situation.
well, yeah, it was interesting for me, because I have a New Mexico accent, which is a non-accent. You know, it's a non-identifiable accent. So to fall in amongst a bunch of blacks who are from the South, then they were like, "Where are you from, man?" I'm like, and I would say Mexico. "Oh, Mexican. All right." Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it was that kind of way, and I had a Mexican accent, because I did have a little carriage of Mexican language syntax in me at that time, because I was mostly around Latinos. So I had that, and a little Spanish, English in my language too, you know. But anyway, yeah, it was pretty. I was another person. I don't like being trapped, you know, and they trapped me, you know. And so I was not a nice guy, you know. I was pretty angry and trapped, and got to see how I would have been if I had been enslaved. I was really not good, you know. And so,
You mean by the Army itself? When you
yeah,
said
the Army, when they, you know, they drafted me and then they forced me. I thought I was going to be able to get out of it because I had trick knees, and but they wanted me to operate on it, and all they could do in those days is exploratory surgery. And I was like, game, hell no, I'm not going to be explored on, because I like my torn you know, ligaments. They'll patch up and heal themselves, you know. And so what do I have to do that? And that was my young self fighting for my body at that time, because, and so lo and behold, when I was in the military, my knee went out. And so I saw that as a godsend, and I used it as a way to get out of Nam. And so I got out of Nam, and I really pushed them, and I ran into a real nice physician that looked at me and asked me how was I walking, and made me an ambulatory patient from that point on. And so then they shipped me to Japan, and I got to see Japan. And then while I was in Japan, the thing that I noticed with myself is I wanted to know who the power was. Who was the power that got my ass into this, you know? And so when I was there, I was there in October, and so Thanksgiving happened, and then the American ambassador had an open invitation to some of the veterans, some of the soldiers who were there, and everybody said, hell no, I'm not going to go ambassador. I'm like, I want to talk to him. You know? So I went there as a young man and got to eat Thanksgiving dinner with the American ambassador and talk to them about the issues of the war and what things were about, and learned a whole lot. And so I liked that so much that when it came up to have Christmas dinner with the general of our base, I did that too. And so I jumped on that, and he happened to be one of the guys that was over the whole theater before the guy, Westmoreland. And so I got to sit down and talk with him over Christmas dinner, and it got me from being sent to Vietnam on Christmas, because I had built myself up so well that they shipped me back to Nam. Because I refused to have them operate on me, and then I built my body up so well that they were like, oh, you're well enough to be killed again. And so they shipped me back over there. But then all of that education that I got with the general and with the ambassador, I put it to work in Vietnam on figuring out how bureaucracies work. And so when the bureaucracy, I noticed, only knew me when I told them that I was there, I didn't tell them I was there until they knew I was there. You know what I'm saying? So, because they put you in shit duty until then, until your records came. I was like, huh, I'll be at the end of the line, and I'll wait until they say Ben Caldwell, and then otherwise I'll just get to know this base and get to know the people that are on the base. So I got to meet a lot of the hip musicians that were in the base. And then when Bob Hope came, I could go into his setup, and I just started going to those kinds of things until my records came. And then once my records came, then they shipped me back to my unit, and my unit, they were crazy. They had made them worry every day that 10,000 MVA were about to kill their ass, and that was how I left. Well, I left under that stress, and then came back 3 months later, and they were super stressed out. Lack of sleep, and just really weren't thinking right, And then the Tet Offensive happened at around the same time, so I was there for the Tet, and then we did something that was a little revolutionary. In that case, is because we had noticed that there was an old man there, and so we pulled him in. And when we pulled him in, we were talking, okay, now we can just pull out, because now you can drop napalm on the village, because there's just this one guy. And then when he heard that, he jumped out of our APC and then ran, and they told us to kill him, And then I aimed at his legs and missed him. And then he came back and brought his whole family.
Oh, yeah.
And then the whole village walked out with us. And then they said, okay, we'll call it off. It was like educational. It was pretty, because we were so happy that we did that, because we ended up pulling almost 150 people out of there behind our track. You know.
Wow.
So those were interesting things, you know, in the sense of kids learning, you know, and that. So, and then I stopped engaging the war. I figured out that war only works if you do something, you know. So I started figuring out how to be a pacifist in a war zone, you know, and I just refused to kill just for you know, I would do it if something was for saving me, but under that whole thing. And that was really educational for me, because it was the first time I could see that, you know, that you really always have a choice. You know?
Was that personal, or did that also involve telling people that that's the stance that you were
It was
taking?
just, I just did it because it was survival, you know. I was surviving in the way that I saw fit that would make Ben feel all right after all this. And that was kind of all I was thinking. I didn't want to have any kind of gratuitous ideas in my brain about something that I did in the fit of anger and lack of focus, you know.
Did you see it go another way for others?
Oh yeah, it was easy to do that way because you're just so pissed off and you make the other as opposed to, and so I really learned a lot by that. And so when I came out of the military, I started just studying people and working, and I did this series of work of just off my family and also being truthful with myself on what I saw. Because I didn't see in black, I didn't see in grays and other colors. I wanted to bring in brilliance and color and swaths of paint, and even stronger than what was on within the camera. So I added to that, you know. So I used an additive paints to all my work, and I also focused on the whole idea of the black body, you know, and specifically a woman's body, but mostly black bodies, and dealt with the gradations of those in the desert. And that made it possible. Well, I sent that series to join for my master's degree at UCLA, and they loved them. And so I got a full ride. And then I got to hang out with these guys.
So before that, you went to Arizona State, is that right?
Yeah, Arizona State was an interesting trip for me because I first went to PCC, Phoenix College, and then Phoenix College, I was a jock. I first played, and so I wanted to prove to myself that I could be a fullback and make it, because I was dreaming about it when I was in the military. So I came back and dealt with it, but I also was a different kid because I saw inferiority when they would try to make me less than who I am. And in football, it's really rampant, you know. So I didn't do well with being called boy, jump on this, and boy, run up there. So I was like, I don't want to drop this ball, so I'm not gonna, just before I pick it up, you kick it and then tell me to jump on it and then bring it back to you, and then call me boy in the same process. I don't want to be football that bad, you know. So I made it through another area, like, oh, you think you're a badass, you think you can't be treated like everybody else and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not trying to say just treat me like I need to be treated. Just say, hi, Ben. You don't have to add anything else to it, you know. You don't have to add, you know. And as long as you do that, I'm cool with you. But any of these added that you add to it, it doesn't work for me. And so we would get into it like that. But I made the team, and then I was kind of, they kind of like that bite in you as a football player. And then I wanted to Arizona State, and so I got a little accepted into that, and then I got out of it. So because I knew I had bad knees, and I thought that I would be a crippled older person. Yeah. So it's like, do I want to be a crippled older person for my pride of manhood, or do I want to go into something that I really like? So I went into economics, and I didn't like that because it wasn't real, because I started asking questions about the depression, and then I was saying these numbers that we're studying here didn't predict the depression, but you're still using it as a mainframe for studying depressions. So what does that mean? You know, it's really very confusing to me. He says, well, economics has its own superstructure and then life has its own. Then I'm like, then why in the fuck am I doing this? You know, because I'm not studying anything to do with reality. So it didn't make any sense to me. So I then went back to, I focused on still photography. And then I also took something that was very, a very unusual class that Arizona State had, and it was revolutionary philosophy. So I liked philosophy, and we had a Russian revolutionary kind of, what are those agents from Russia? The undercover, like the CIA? KGB. Yeah, well, they had a KGB guy teaching that class because he had defected from the Communist Party, and he was teaching this class at Arizona State. I was like, I found it out, and then he ended up being my buddy. So we would talk about all the different revolutions. And the one thing I saw in that kind of has super impressed me even more as I've gotten older is the artists in all of those revolutions was able to make it through every step of a revolution because they were dealing with art and not politics. And so that's something that I would just like, last week I was in Chicago and I said that. I was like, I'm not political, I'm an artist, you know. I says, because I want, the thing that I've found as I'm getting older, that politicians stop people from communicating with other people that are other than themselves. So if you're a Muslim, if you're a Republican, then you don't talk to a Democrat. If you're Muslim, you don't talk to a Christian. But if an artist, I can culturally work with whoever. And I found that out even more so when I taught at Cal Arts more recently, because I even had Nazis in my class from Germany, you know, who believe in real fascism. But as an artist, we can communicate because it's about an art form that's within that milieu that I don't necessarily like or understand, but we can discuss things in an artistic manner. And just like Leni Riefenstahl, you know, I like the hell out of her work, but I don't like what she was pushing, you know, or telling the story of, but man, did she do a good job, you know? And so that's the kind of thing that I think we as artists have a kind of a thing that's outside that thing. And so that's really, on the philosophical, political thing, Ben Caldwell as a 65-year-old, that's the thing that I've discovered, you know, and having a business done business in Cuba, done business in places that are hot spots. I found that when I go there as an artist, that I don't have to worry about people and the politics, because even when we were going to Cuba, we went to people exchange, and I went there spiritually with the yoga teachers, you know, and we dealt with it like that, and even with them, it's an interesting way to enter a society as a spiritual person, you know, because you get to see things in a way that other people don't. So I got to go to Ghana and to Cuba in that manner, and it was really a hell of a good way to go. And I did it as a documentary. So.
Right. But at the end of the day, I mean,
We're back.
I was just going to ask you, you know, at the end of the day, is it still a political act, whether you want it to be or not?
Well,
because the way other people use it.
Well, it's interesting. I just know that your alignment with the politicians, when you, even with how I'm having to run my business here, if the councilmen, all of them run, it doesn't matter who the guy is or the woman is who's the politician at the time. They're only going to be here 4 to 8 years. I'm going to have to be here forever. So if I align with these different alignments, what I do is have them both in the house and have all the, you know, be a media person, just like television, just have everybody have their forum. When the police attack, after that, we did several events with people who rented the place who did anti-police things. And the police found out about it and they were like, I thought we had an understanding. And they're like, the understanding is what? I'm going to still rent this place to people whoever wants to say something. If it's a Nazi, they can rent it. You know, I don't care as long as they're not putting down people or wanting to kill them. I'm just wanting to to have everybody say their piece just like TV does, you know.
What was the police attack that you alluded to?
This is it right here. I'll show you.
Now, then on this, can you give me a copy of that file so I can concentrate on you, but know I have that for cutaways?
Yeah, I have it as a QuickTime file, if that's what you mean.
That would be perfect.
Okay. So this is a documentary done with one of my students. She did it on the whole idea of what we're doing here.
And here is where?
This is Chaos Network. And I named this place Chaos Network out of the whole idea of computers, because they use computer math as chaos math theory.
Here at the Chaos Network Multimedia Classroom in the Crenshaw District's Lumert Park. Vice officers have received earlier several citizen complaints regarding an illegal nightclub operating at the location. But video of the incident shot by one of the project's students showed riot police in place before students emerged onto the street.
They were trying to force and play their kids into doing something. They were trying to play them into reacting.
My name is the Reverend Deacon Minister Maximilian speaking to you about the...
So, as it said, they attacked a media classroom, and what happens with my classes is I started when I first came back to Los Angeles, because I left going on film tours with my films, and then I taught at Howard for 3 years, and so I came back with that kind of an understanding, and then I wrote a grant to be an artist in the community, and I happened to be one of the first video artists to get it in the state, where because of my little master's degree and my past Howard experience, they were able to make it where I could teach and work with the community. And so I put this package together where it was like what Shirley Clark had taught us about using media in a real democracy way. So we let the kids play with the cameras, handle the cameras of power, so they could see that they could be a part of it. So, and then I'd have them shoot us, and then we shoot them, and then just get them relaxed around the whole medium. So that was what my workshops were, is just really get close to this medium. You can handle it, see your face on a big screen, all of that. And Shirley believed that the camera and the television was like a dancer's fourth wall, where they can, because when you watch yourself on television, you kind of adjust your posture, and you watch your diction, and there's a whole thing that happens when you know that you're being documented, and you see it at the same time. It causes you to tweak yourself, And so I use that as a tweaking, as opposed to me telling them, you're slopping down. They know what it looks like, so they look at themselves and they pose for it, and just give the camera its due, and that helps them with their sense of posture, who they are as an adult, growing into an adult, and all those things. So I would pop through a lot of kids just that way, is just like pop them on the screen, have them say who they are, what you're about, do it with authority, and I would go through whole classes like that, just like, and that was when cameras and television and all that wasn't in their environment. So I used that as the first step of trying to emancipate the
And this is when you started, and if you could also tell me just a little bit about like what age group you're working with, but also what part of Los Angeles we're in.
Yeah, I was in Watts.
Yeah.
So when I first came in, I was in Watts Towers, and I was working with a phenomenal man by the name of John Otterbridge. And John is a phenomenal artist and kind of cultural activator that makes good things happen in this town. He's really, really fantastic. He's from Chicago, musician, artist, sculptor, a lot of just things. He could reprocesses his junk and metal into making them like animate objects that almost seem like they walk and move. Their spirit. John Otterbridge, yeah. And if you guys aren't tapping him, you should definitely do something with him, because he ran the Communicative Arts Academy, which was the first media organization, art fusion. The thing that was unique to me about the LA artist movement here is that it was all fused together. It wasn't just theater or just film or just photography. The musicians, the poets, the painters, all of us were friends with each other and got to talk across artistic borders. You know, so it was a kind of a holistic look that was happening here, including how it manifested itself with organizations like The Gathering and Dr. Lagan. They had Black Gnostic classes on teaching secret thoughts and processes about Egypt just all of these different kinds of things were happening concurrent together in this place. You know, even when I first came, and this is the 70s when I first came, so this is 71 when I first came to Los Angeles. They had places called the Jua that was a collective of all the artists doing hair, braiding, leather, just creating all different types of things with an African move, you know, African feel to it. And they were 20-somethings. You know, all of us were around our 20s and doing this. And then they also had drum classes with master drum teachers, you know, from Nigeria that were teaching drum and dance classes. They had co-ops for food, growing environments, also collective living environments where they all lived with, you know, like the hippie movement type thing, gathering. It was, all of that was taking place here when I came here, and this neighborhood had all the top performers, you know, so like you could have the Miracles, the Temptations, Richard Pryor, the rhythm and blues performers. This place was just reeking with that type of stuff. And that's the LA that I came here for. I came here, and this is the neighborhood that had it in here, and it's part of the reason that I gravitated here. Because at first, when I moved to Los Angeles, I lived close to the school, so I lived in Westwood first, and then I lived in Santa Monica. And when I was editing my films at night, I would drive up the freeway and get off on Crenshaw and drive up and down this street because, again, I'm from New Mexico. So just the smell of barbecue and these big, beautiful butt women and just the brown skins and just the smiles, just the whole thing that I wasn't used to, but to see it when I would come here was just really a blessing. So while I was editing my film, I would always come here and then go to Santa Monica and then come here. And just
you're drawn here.
Drawn very much here. I like this place, and my aunt lived around the corner, so they introduced me to the place too. But I thought I wasn't going to be able to conquer the freeway system, so I got as close to the school as possible. Right. And I also liked the air in Santa Monica and Westwood, because at that time the air down here was even still bad. But in Santa Monica, my eyes didn't water, and in Westwood and those places, because my eyes being from Arizona and New Mexico was not used to this kind of smog that was here. So I also stayed there. But even there, I found out a lot about the history, because just being in my ethnographic brain, I always ask about where, what, and whys of a place. And then also as being a scout in New Mexico, we would go all the way to the Indian time. So I would always want to know, where were the Indians living here? What was that like in this area? And then I remember even, because I was in the military, I liked reading maps. So the whole thing, I was trying to get the LA River. I was like, oh, cool, I'll be able to kill a lot of time hanging around the rivers over here. And I was like, drive across them and didn't even know I had passed it. So that was kind of interesting too. So, but it still made me map the area and made me look at it in another way. And then some of my earlier times with the projects of the community arts program, so we worked with the Humanitas Project. And that was one of our kind of, I guess, semi-political projects where we, as artists, media artists, worked with teachers. And we worked with the teachers with their, from 7 o'clock in the morning till their 12 o'clock class. And then we would have history, art, what else? History, art, and not science. We wanted to integrate science into it, but we had about 4 different classes that would all collaborate. And then we would go out and look at the native culture, and then we looked at the Spanish culture and found all old haciendas and where they were, and then dealt with the map of Los Angeles in the earlier days, and then the people, and then do it all the way up until it became westernized, and then looked at the airport systems and stuff like that were in and around Los Angeles. I really dug that kind of way of teaching. So we would help them then present it in a video way, and then the kids got to learn a lot about the native culture, all of those cross-secting spaces.
What sort of cross currents do you see with that kind of work, and then what you were describing about sort of what you found in sort of the early, sort of the black movement in Los Angeles, tapping into African history and culture and sort of finding who you are in the world?
Well, the thing that was unique about California is once you do that kind of research, it freaks you out, because this was a it was colonized by black Hispanics, you know? And so that was like, how come people don't bring that out, you know? And then you find out that Olivera Street is called the Calle de Negros, you know? And so the street of the blacks. And so it's like, wow, this is pretty deep. And when did that name change go? It was with 1932, so when it was the same time that this place was built, you know? So there's a kind of an interesting history thing that happens here, because actually California's history almost started in the early 30s to me, you know, because they were switching up. Yeah. And I used to co-teach a class with Norman Cline, and he calls California the history of forgetting.
Yeah. I was just going to say, because there's just so much covering up or saying that there is no history when there obviously is.
When there's a lot of deep history. So that was what was unique. And so that ended up being my banner of discussing, because my family are black Hispanics. You know, we're from that kind of stuff. So we're mestizos, we're all of what that is about. And so to me, I saw a lot of similarities there. I saw us there, you know. So that was what I was digging about the history. And then I thought that should be brought out more. And then that kind of even, let's see, so that led to, in '84, I also did another project called Electronic Cafe. And Electronic Cafe was a part of the Olympics, and we connected 5 disparate communities using what later became the internet, you know? And so that was part of how I started working that way too. So the whole idea of melding cultures, and then the same thing was happening with me in this politics and non-politics thing. So I found even more then that it's important to do art, because the more you do, you divide, you know, so if you have the Latino culture hooking with the white culture, hooking with the black culture, hooking with the Asian culture, and then you talk politics, it's like, you talk religion, it explodes too. But you talk about, so I'll bring in a kora player, and then talk about the confluent culture between the kora and flamenco, because they're right across. And I was saying, I know there must be some kind of cultural connection, because they're just across the ocean the sea from each other. So there has to be some kind of confluence. And then lo and behold, when we're discussing it and working it out with this teleconferencing connection, it comes off that the Meningo has a flamingo group, you know, because the kora is a natural thing of a guitar, and then the kind of stomping and the movements are all culturally blended. So it's just pretty obvious that those things happen. So that was what I started trying to do, is to find the confluence of each culture, because as African culture, you'll find a confluence in every culture, because we're the foundation of cultures. You know, we're the old people. So those old people have infiltrated all of the various parts of other cultures. And so that's the way that I started dealing with it. So in some ways, it's like, even when we're doing projects with China, we find out that there's Africa in China, and then the whole Chinese museum will tell you, you know, that in fact these things are happening, that there is Egyptian influence from the ancient days of those times, and so each of these things happen. So, and then that helps both sides, because we then get to see this migration pattern that we talked about, Lucy leaving and all these types of migration patterns and this, but we play like it doesn't happen when we talk in real life. And so that's what I found my job is to do, is remind people that, you know, Khalifa, which was a black Amazon that infatuated a group of guys that were blackamoors who were Spaniards who came here. You know what I'm saying?
I'm smiling because in my field in history, the sort of the hot thing right now is global history, and I always sort of come back to, well, what else is there?
Yes.
Right? I mean,
yeah, so it's just like you're able to kind of like connect those things, and even with me, I looked up. I had the Book of Beginnings. I looked at the Book of Beginnings, and I looked at my hometown in New Mexico. Right, I look up the members Indians. Who are their major influences? The Phoenicians. They have Phoenician language. I'm just like, damn, man, what in the fuck is this? That doesn't even get brought up in my history when I was studying in kid, But that was, in fact, something that the Book of Beginnings, and I was like, wow. So then when I read about Hannibal and them being a part of the Phoenicians, and then you look into the wars that the Italians had with them, and then them attacking Carthage and wanting to kill the place because those folks found ways to pay them back quicker than they wanted to, and they were saying, how in the fuck are they able to do it? I bet you they went to the Americas to get their goals and their payback money. They went to the Aztecs and stuff and came back and said, here's your shit, what? And that was what was coming to me in the sense of let's say, well, we got to stop them from, and then the Romans said, we got to stop them from getting in the ocean because they're powerful in the ocean, and that's what makes their strength, because even when we whip them, they still are in the ocean. So they stopped them from doing their ocean travel, and then stopped them from coming back to their home because they disengaged that whole place. So it's that kind of stuff that I think that needs to be kind of mentioned as a part of our history, and it would make young black kids feel a little bitter because we're included in the history. It isn't just like a subnote, because that was my frustration as a kid, is like I would get real fascinated about seeing Caesar, but then my ass is getting whipped. I'm like, that's not helping me because I can't dream. It's always dream within a slave mentality, and if the Greeks, and then you're just the painter that's getting your ass whipped. Oh, then there too, and then Egypt, even in Africa land, the Nubians got their asses whipped by the guys who came from the north. So they're just every way that you try to find yourself in history being powerful, it gets stomped on.
Right. And so you saw a way of putting media tools in the hands of these kids as a way for them to sort of shape where they are.
Yeah, to start at least finding out the definition, and as I'm finding it out too, so we could use this strong medium as a way to empower yourself and to engage and to redefine and like the word that we're using now, rebrand black. To kind of offer that up.
Sure.
What I'm doing now?
I think of what I'll do. Okay. Could I just ask you to just give us the quick story of Chaos Network?
Okay.
What was behind it when you got started? We've talked a little bit about, I think, but what are the kinds of things that have happened here that you've been able to do?
Okay. So yeah, when I started Chaos Network, then it was Video 33, and then it morphed into Chaos Network. I named it 333 because I thought, again, it was kind of the chaos numbers. It was the pyramid numbers and all that stuff I was playing around with. And so, but I initially really just started this place because I wanted to fund myself outside of Hollywood. I wanted to figure out how I could live as a media person like a lawyer does without having to be at Cedars-Sinai, or how I'm not a lawyer, but a doctor, but a lawyer having to do law for the state or something. They could do their own private business. So I said I'm going to emulate that concept and then just put my card in the door, say I'm open for business. So who am I going to work for? And I said I'm going to work for what I now call the poor and the vulnerable, and use the medium as a way to build strength with them because they don't have anybody to advocate for them in this neighborhood. So I'm going to act as an advocate for the poor and the vulnerable with this medium. And so so I started working with all the nonprofits. So I says, I'll offer up my skill that I normally would, work at Columbia Pictures. I want to come here and work in the community with that. And so that was how I started, really. And then they paid me to work 20 hours for myself. And then so me and Charles Burnett, who's a fellow filmmaker, we started working on a script, and I wanted to make it, I did research and finding that kids from 11 to 25, young people, were the most treated the most outside the culture. They were treated, they weren't understood a lot by the society. And so I thought that that would be an interesting focus for me, because it also is where new culture grows from, is the new dance movements, the new feelings and everything. So I said this might be an interesting place, because I could do ethnographic work and then also use that like Zora Neale Hurston, to use it as notes of a culture. And then we can build scripts out of it for dramatic sense, because then it can be real as opposed to, so I said, okay, let me find out what the kids are. Who are they? You know, so I put them up and says, what's this hippity hop stuff that you're talking about? So what is that about? And they would break down the words, you know, fresh means this, and, you know, jamming means something else, and break dancing, and all these, they just broke out the whole language.
That's all breaking.
Huh?
Yeah, that's all breaking right at this time.
Yeah.
You're working,
yeah, that film was called, at first called it the Nubian, but the people weren't understanding it, so we ended up calling it I Fresh. And so, and I blended it with the idea of the Rasta movement. So that was how I was really starting to look at things. Is so when I was in DC, I started looking at the youth movements, because the thing that I was starting to notice with my study of the blues was it was the young kids that created the blues. It was the young kids who created jazz. They were young and they grew old in it, you know. And so I was like, wow, that's interesting, and it's almost generational. So each of them, but it's the same story, so, but told with different tools, you know, the tools of the time period of that. And so I saw that, followed it all the way to them being cut off of the instruments, and then saying, okay, now we're going to research the past by remixing all of what was there. And so I saw it as remixing and a historical study, as opposed to what a lot of the guys were feeling, that, oh, these damn kids are just stealing music and they don't have no music sense and all that. But what did you expect if you cut the music out of their world? And so, and the most logical thing is that we have an archive of the best music that ever happened in the world that's in these records here. And so they started going through it and doing the crate jobs that they were doing. And so that was how I would.
It's homage, and it's historical research, and it's all of that. It's really interesting. I just think of, like, you know, James Brown, like funky drummer, just gets used over and over.
Yeah, and I would even ask some of the kids at first. You know, that was how I would deal with them. I was like, man, you guys think you're doing that with the 808? Listen to this live beat by James Brown. What? You know, you know, listen to these different guys that have created music. And it at first they would push back from it, and then eventually they would soak it up. And I remember the place for me that I learned that it was a totally different world was when I loaned them one of my albums, and they started scratching the shit. And I almost hit the kid. You know, I was like, you're doing what? And then I was like, well, I'm going to give it back to you. And I'm like, hell no, man. I'm going to have to buy another album. I just don't understand you guys. You're tripping. You know, why are you scratching my album up, man? You know, so we got it like that. But then again, you know, I started understanding and it actually integrated it in my work. I made glitches my scratches. You know, I started going toward those as a kind of a way to start, you know, dealing with my ideas. And so, so the last film that I put together at UCLA for me to go out in the world with was, well, actually there were two films, because I went to ethnographic film study. So my film in that one, 1980, I did a thing called Babylon is Falling, a visual ritual for peace. And what I did with that is I chronicled the interconnection of the African continent with the New World continent with the Old World, to kind of show the triangular slave trade, but then to show how people within the triangular slave trade always fought back. It wasn't just a rollover and beat them up type of thing. It was a constant push and a pushback, a push and pushback. So I just wanted to show that as a part of my thesis of showing it in that way. And the other piece that I did around the same time that was a film. So that Babylon is Falling was multimedia. It was using every form that you could get, from magazines to slides to whatever, anything that had a picture, I would use it, you know. and use it to tell my story. And then the other one before that was called the Nubian. And the Nubian was going to be a precursor to this I Fresh, and it's basically, the whole idea was a part of what my ethnographic study was African religion. And so I would go to Bimbe's and all those, and so I always infuse the idea of spirituality in every of these pieces that I did, which I should probably name the films, huh? I've done Iron. My first film was Medea, and Medea, that was done in '71, and it didn't have anything to do with Tyler Perry. But it dealt with the iconography of a mother God figure, and so I showed her up against the desert. So it was just following my line of doing these nudes in the desert as an Arizona person. So I did the same thing, but I integrated animation, which was also a part of my past too. So, and what I did was the teacher who I worked with at that time was a person that worked with the Smothers Brothers, and he did Dan McLaughlin, and he did the history of Western art in 2 minutes, you know, like did it real fast, and I was impressed by that. And says, what if I did the history of African people in like 3 or 4 minutes too, and to make that all the information that goes inside this mother figure, and then have her give birth. And then at the end of that birth, I say a culture provides identity, purpose, and direction. If you know who you are, then you know what your purpose is. You know, so it was just that kind of simple, poetic. And then I had then Leroy Jones' poem over it, and it was showing the all of our history, and a chant poem saying, "Raise the dead, raise the dead niggas, raise the dead, raise the dead niggas, raise the dead, raise the dead niggas, raise the raise the raise the raise the race, raise the race and raise the for this time in this race, and this time for the next race," and that kind of a hook in it. So I used that as a kind of a constant chant with a breathing all through it, and then the kind of a heartbeat of the baby all through it too. And then it build up to a crescendo, and then go, and then that, like that. So it was fun to do because as a film kid raised in that was what I always wanted, was something visual, you know, not talking heads, you know. So, and so, and then the next piece I did was called I, and it dealt with my military life. Is that I saw it was the first time that you could kill somebody when you made them the other, you know. So that was the whole idea of I, was that we're all the same people in this earth, and that things have gotten astray by the devil or whoever, that makes it where it's you and I. And from that point on, there's been trouble on the world, and the world has gone astray. So that's my subtext to start this story and a journey. And what I was doing at that time was I wanted to fuse, I was really interested in changing the rhythm patterns of films, because to me films needed to be infused with what has been called soul in music, you know, whatever that is that divides our music, that makes it that uniqueness that Michael has Michael, you know, nobody can do Michael. You know, Stevie Wonder is Stevie, nobody can do Stevie, you know. John Coltrane is John Coltrane, nobody can touch the soul that he's able to touch. And then Mr. Bird, who then thought of centrifugal breathing as a methodology to have his own space. You know, all those kind of unique ways of dealing with your art, I think, was what I like about our people. And when you know you're getting stopped, then you say, okay, follow me down this road, you know, okay, never come up for air, okay? You know, where's your air gonna come from, you know? And so I think that kind of stuff is really interesting to me, to see what happens with humans when they get trapped, you know? And that was what I felt like when Nam getting trapped like that. And so I felt it, what would that been like 500 years of that, you know? And then how does cultures deal with that? And so it was fun kind of etching that kind of stuff out, so it made me look at different places. And so hip hop was an amalgamation of all of that. For instance, even the breakdancing, for instance. Yeah. Breakdancing was capoeira, right? And so capoeira was a coded dance that was a viciously strong martial art, you know? And that got us our freedom in Brazil. You know, there wouldn't be any maroon societies. There wouldn't have been there wouldn't have been the Rastas without it, you know, because they were able to whip ass and go up on the hills and protect themselves with this magic fighting system, you know. And so I think, and when I read about that, it was like, there's that soul fighting, because these cats would watch a horse and watch him get, there's a certain point when all four legs are off the ground, grab one leg, pull it from under them, have razors on their legs, cut the rider's knife, and then disappear behind a bush, all in one fell swoop. That's cowboy and everything else mixed together, you know, and so that kind of fascinated me in the studying of this stuff as we were going through it, because this is stories you don't get to see, but imagine if we were able to embody that in movies. So that was what I started thinking. So Charles and I started writing, and so the I Fresh, the Nubian, was really about young people who have that ancient spirit in them, and how does it get activated, you know, and that they are being activated periodically throughout the movie, and sometimes they don't know it, you know, and so that's what it's about, the first level of the movie. So I was going to make the first movie like that, and the next movie where it becomes even more like a superhero, but to make it go toward a superhero in time, not the first episode. So that's my next life, is to work on this whole series from the Nubian out, and to show it in different places. Like I want to show how some of my life in Southwest. So when the person travels there, they can meet the Geronimo and interburst with the thought processes of the real Indians there, and how they feel about their life, you know, and you know, between that, Texas and Oklahoma kind of gathering of folks, you know. And so each, you know, and then you go to the South, we can then kind of embody the spirits of the people that were there in New Orleans, and the voodoo that's in some of the, like my mom was raised in Texas, and they still practice a little bit of that stuff and believed it in that environment. So that's the other part, is the whole migration west, you know, that hasn't really got looked at too. So all those stories are what I'm wanting to tell, is that Western migration, because we've had the Northern migration from the South, but no one really has charted our story, you know, and told it in a way that makes it insightful and understanding. So that's one of the things that I plan on doing.
Do you feel like in your storytelling too, I'm just curious how you were responding to some of like the blaxploitation films, or some of the more mainstream treatments of this kind of fighting back kind of character that you're describing, and were you playing with that?
Yeah, I didn't never like those guys. Yeah. It was, no, as a matter of fact, is when our films get shown in Europe, they feel proud at us. They say, "You guys are the only. Why aren't this is like jazz, you know?" And that was the best thing I ever heard, because they were saying that we were following the tradition of jazz and not of Amos and Andy. You know, and to me, most of the work is Amos and Andy. Yeah. You know, and so I never. Now, see, it's according to what you call blaxploitation. Right. So that was what the thought to me is like, some are telling the true story. Like Superfly was a true story. It was written by a black man, directed by black men. Shaft was a superhero concept. All the copies are the blaxploitation. To me, and it's, you know, the same thing with Mr. Sweet Sweetback. You know, that was a true. It had sex, it had craziness, and all the. But then to make those then icons that represent us forever, no, that's not us. You know, and so. That's the problem, I think, that's what I call blaxploitation. Jamal Fanaka, he did the Penitentiary series. I helped him do those things. I don't consider those blaxploitation. It was a black man's rendition of what he saw in that world. but anybody else who emulates that and writes that as supposed to be our story, then it becomes that means exploitation to me, because they're exploiting something that they caused in the first place.
Sure.
And I'm not saying the artists themselves, but that the society as a whole has caused to a certain group of people to have to be in shit, and then you see them in shit, and then they make the story about them in shit, and then they tell it in a way that humanizes the whole process in ways, because they found jazz and blues there, and they found something that they were able to make flowers out of the compost, And I think that's a blessing that we've been blessed with. And I'm beginning to see that when I'm doing my most recent study, that it really was planned, by the Egyptians. The Egyptians inculcated the power of the music, and they put all of their thousands of years of history and icons in our music. And that's the reason it's extremely powerful, because it's touching on things that that we're not even aware of yet, And I started noticing that because it's almost our cosmology. It tells our worldview to its umpteenth degree. And any portion of it is like a hologram about our world. And the mathematics, the structure, your cadence, the symbols, all of it is like a hologram. And you can break it off, and it'll answer all the various questions. If you need science answer, you need a cosmology answer, all of them are built already into the music. And I'm finding out more recently that that's how Africans are teaching the history, the ones that are enlightened about their culture. They're teaching it in that manner. And the more interesting thing too is that they're teaching it, that their migration, the reason that they had these massive migrations is for obvious reasons. Alexander the Great, because he wasn't too great for Africa, and Caesar. Those incursions into Africa caused the great migrations that we're talking about, from those areas of that world, And so that's the kind of interesting thing. Oh, anyway, I get all excited about all this shit.
Let me stop first. We're going again. Because you were going to show us some hip hop stuff, right?
Well, before we get there, I just could you take us just back to the moment of UCLA and the cohort that you found there in that community, and you alluded to it a little bit. But. Yeah,
well, what we found was first person was Haile Garima. Haile, this is the way the school went. It's like when we first went there, up until the year we started, all the people of color who were going to school there were considered the other. They were ethnographic. So everything was ethnographic with Asians, with Middle Easterners, even Yugoslavia and all those kinds of places. They were all considered the other. And so we all had ethnographic, so there was an ethnographic layer that was still at the school. And so we came in for the first year to being the first film students to be a part of the regular program. So it had that kind of an onus on how people treated us, like some of them were treating us like we were that they're still fighting about us having a privilege because, did we deserve to be there kind of thing, and have the money to be in this rich school kind of thing. So that whole thing was, and so it forced us, so nobody wanted to work with us. So Haile happened to be the first person to become a TA at that time. And so we all gathered around Haile and says, okay, cool, if they're going to push us into a corner, then let us all be in the corner together and work out some ideas. And so we created, so it made us create every grant that the students had, we won them. And after we won them, they killed them. They would stop the mayor grant. We're getting those 10, 20 grand. And so we were just lining up saying, okay, it's your turn next, so you go for it. And by the time we all got, it was our turns, they all started disappearing, And so we were like, damn. So, but that's the camaraderie that we had, and it was about 13 of us. And it grew into about 22 of us, and over 10 years, and we're still doing films and stuff, but for the most part, we were able to create what, 22 features, no, 55 features, shorts and features, you know. And
where did the name come from, the LA Rebellion?
It was, yeah, it was put on us by a man who thought that it would be a good idea because it struck the ears right, you know. So that was where they put it. And I hated the name at first, but I figured, and then I looked up rebellion, and you know what comes up first? Slave rebellion, if you Google it. You know? So I was like, so maybe that's the way they saw us, as people who, just because we, again, were prideful, we wanted to make our work really represent our people in a real way, and we use music as our main structure to build from that, because music was very free to us, you know, and so we used our structure of that. So,
would you have preferred revolution to rebellion, or?
I don't know. I think, well, what we called ourselves is the LA School.
Just straight up.
Yeah, that was what we were being called up until it got called the rebellion. And so, but rebellion means, I think it means that we rebelled against doing blaxploitating films. And so I think that's an interesting discussion. And so that was something that they were starting to use that as a mode to discuss that whole era. Because at the same time, Europe got to see our work, and here in this country, only museums and college elite got to see our work. But for the most part, it wasn't shown in regular theaters. You know? Right. And so it was kind of kicked out of the country, like jazz was too. You know, so, and blues too. You know, it was not very well treated by the populace while it was here, but the people overseas really saw the beauty in it. Because I'm telling you, like my film, when I showed it at, they had a retrospective in Paris, the I got a standing ovation because the people said it was a real African film. And why aren't more people doing films that celebrate Africa in a prideful way? Shirley Clark, the thing that she said after she saw my film at the first school screening, she's like, how long do you think that you can keep the people who built the pyramids down? You know, you know, so it's that kind of a thought process that I think our work brings on. Is just that it shows the prideful, high cultural sense of our culture. You know, and we like to carry it with pride. You know.
So now let's move to
okay.
hip-hop and
well,
and also back to maybe to the footage you were starting to show of when the police came storming in.
Okay.
Pick up back with that.
Yeah, with the pool, let's see, the hip-hop. I have the group of guys that I started working with here, they're called Project Blowed. I started with them in '84. Not 84, yeah, Project Blowed. I started with them not in '84, I started with them in '92. But in '84, I started with the group called iFresh. But let's see, here this is. Let's see, I don't have to get busy on here. Let's see. Yeah, I have one that has all the guys on it. Get busy. So let me just do this one right here, because this is where I am right now in history, is we're doing a project that we're calling using the Sankofa principles. And Sankofa principles is, again, the whole idea of soul. I'm trying to really investigate how the thing that we have to offer up to the world is the struggle that we went through in life, and how we were able to stay healthy and focus. Culture out of it has a lot to do with our music. It has a lot to do with our idea of having everything have our innate body, but also the spiritual body about it is an integral part of what African thought process, even as African Americans. And I always use the example of just the Baptist church. You can see how black people deal with it and how the Western world dealt with it. You know, just as those, that's just one of the most dichotomic actions of just how Western, and then you can say, bump, bump, with a horn, with the saxophone, and then Coltrane and, you know, and Bird, how they dealt with that same thing that was beer music and really propelled that horn into another level of like emulating a voice and stuff, you know. So I think that that's what we can offer up as technologists, is a kind of a blissful blend of spirit with a technological instrument. And so the first thing that we thought that I had as was to repurpose payphones. And so in repurposing them, since I was doing this teleconferencing and all those, is like, how can we connect people? And then again, how could it take care of the poor and the vulnerable? So the first thought is, let's put a Wi-Fi on the payphone. And then if we add Wi-Fi, then it has a carcass that we could put a computer in. And so, yeah, that's a part of what we ended up doing, is then it could be a totem, emulate the ancient totem system. And then, but then to repurpose the original piece itself, we started deconstructing them, tearing them apart, put them back together, see how you can add a computer into the whole thought process. And so about 5-6 weeks ago, we put this project together at the School of Innovation. And I'm really also trying to track teaching and I really like working in college environments, because you get about 20 heads on an idea, you can get a lot more done, and I really like that type of process. And I'm very open with cultures, because I think it's fun to see it in a lot of different ways. So we had Chinese students, people from what, like Slavonia and Pakistan and those areas, along with folks from various parts of the United States, and then blacks and whites and South Africans. Just a lot of just blissful blend of 15 master's and PhD students from USC and the School of Innovation. So we put this together. And thought of it as like a treasure chest of ideas and concepts. And using the Sankofa principles, and to reclaim your past by going into the future with pride. And the whole wrap again, like I was saying, is to do this thing for the poor and the vulnerable, is the envision an open face. And so the whole idea of it being open and free is really enticing to me, because I think we can kind of, that might be an interesting way for us to kind of occupy the virtual space. And so that was what I started thinking, is an occupation of the virtual space, and then we occupy it with our icons. Then that iconography could be the things that we work with in the future smartphone sphere. And so if we already know what the problems are going to be, and we have ticket takers that are there for the things that are virtual, then we could make sure that gentrification doesn't happen in that sphere, in the virtual sphere. So that's what the thought process was with this. And so how can we do it? How can we engage? And then to do a class that we can track for 10 years. And to resist gentrification and see if we can make a sustainable community. And I use this type to show how chaos works, is to organize ideas, to get concepts together, and then to set up these social models, to scale up and down so we can replicate the systems, and then to influence the providers, and then to encourage artists to really be some of the major people that engage it on the growing level. Because if we can engage things when the art is involved, then I think artists can help a whole lot, because most people don't know how to think like artists, And
you're saying get in on the ground floor, right? Because all this is coming down the pipeline.
Right.
So be there when it's ready to begin.
So we can have these as ideas, because I already met with MTA, and I told them we have these things. And they're like, wow! So we can help define what they dream toward, if we've already done the dreaming, so this is what this workshop was about, is to get all the different people, we get over a phone, and then we use the Steve Jobs methodology of quickly thinking of ideas and user-friendliness of the objects. So we would do that, saying if you plugged it in, what it would do? What would you press? How would you act through it? And just go through the whole process and not just think of something, but how will it really work? So this was the whole planning part of it. And then the mission, like I said, was to attack that monitor, I mean the payphone in front of my building here, because it was a private owned one. It isn't owned by Pac Bell. So we could hack it and get an idea of how to do it. And then, you know, this is to show that it's the first thing that you normally come and see if you come up, and this is what you normally see now. Right. And so we bought 14 of them from a shopping center and got them for $20 each.
Because they were just getting right on.
Yeah. And they didn't see what need we have. And so we're thinking of doing hyper-local distribution with it. So all the wonderful music and arts that are created in film and video and all the things that are created, you have to come here to get it. So it forces people to come to a black community to get the needs. Kind of like it did in the past. If you wanted to go to the black neighborhood, you had, you know, to listen to jazz and love. That was it. So we then came up with our logo and our label. We've got it as an integral part. And we used Sankofa and also the Phoenix, which are the same kind of concept as regeneration. And this is regeneration to Brazilians, is to have a piranha eat it and make it something. And then here's New York, they made a phone booth into a library. And so just to give people ideas of a lot of different ways that we can attack it. And then an aquarium. I want to see that in France. And this is San Francisco. They tagged it up and added some vibe to it, you know.
Right. Yeah, phone's even gone at that point, yeah.
And then this is the whole idea of local producing. So this guy made his music where you can only get it at this cafe. And then this is the Raspberry Priz. That's the computer interface that you can tie a screen to. You can do all kinds of things with it. And of course, we want to show documentaries. And then CR codes. So we're thinking of coming up with real unusual ones so we could, so you could, if a person had it on the t-shirt, you could aim the thing at the person, or you could show it on a magazine and art. And then we're mapping the cultural density of this area. So within the 5-mile radius of here, there isn't a black person who's famous that didn't live or work around this area. And that's really frightening. I mean, it's like, you know, you can almost just say anybody. You just say it. Miles Davis, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald lived right up the street, Hampton Hawes, Chambers Brothers. It's just on and on and on. And so we want to bring this out. And then we have the new schoolers that I've been working with. So the new schoolers we have that have been out of my place is like, the early ones is the guy who did Lion King. He was one of the young kids that we worked with when they were being ostracized and couldn't have a home to place. So we provide them with that. And this is another concept that we were thinking of, is the urban treasure hunt. So that makes it where people can go around with their bicycles or walk and test out other places, and then have coupons that they can use as a way for that. And so this is what I'm saying, as an artist, we can think of a lot of just unusual ways for things to happen if we engage the earlier parts of this. So that was what I'm finding as my new world, is just to let's do this story banks, you know, just like people can come up to it and use Skype, tell stories.
And listen to other stories?
And listen to other stories. By sending them to your smartphone is what we're thinking, you know, so you can.
I'm working on similar kind of stuff. It's awesome.
And so this is the mapping project that I was telling you. So we're doing the mapping, the cultural density of the neighborhood, so we can show that that's the economic engine for this neighborhood, and that we need to really bring it up, because we can't act like we're surprised that our music is worth money anymore, you know? So I think we should act like it's worth money. So that's what I'm doing with this, and I really just broke this out on saying how booths could be used, you know, for triggering videos, DJ music. You know, you drop a quarter in, you can see a local business thing. You can use it as a a tour for an audio tour, so it can be used at adults and things, so you can go to each one of these places. And so it's just really good for all these different things. So. And this is the other part that I started dealing with, is just all the different things that it could be used for. Which is quite surprising. I mean, you know, how stretched out. And then these are some of the kids, this just to show the cultural impact. I have groups of kids here that are really cutting edge and front music. So this movement here hasn't been defined yet. It's like a blend of hip hop and punk music and skater, and they call it Wild That's So Indie and Bananas.
And they perform out of this space?
They perform here. And then these are religious, like we had like religious hip hop church here too, where the men who really wanted to praise God but wanted to do it with like rapping style, they would get around in a circle and praise the God like they felt it, you know. And it was kind of interesting. So for me, you know, cinema screenings, we have these in here.
So do you feel like you sort of, like whose space is this? Do you feel like you sort of curate this space, or kind of?
Well, it's an investigative. I see it as really a laboratory to testing ideas out and then launching them out to the world.
Yeah. Cultural startup.
Yeah. And we've been able to really start up a lot of people in different ways here. And so it's just really using the idea of four walls and a mind and getting the kids together and being positive. We're able to do almost anything. So I'm able to do one thing after another or have multiple things concurrent. So this is our multiple thing concurrent. We came up with an art walk to attack empty buildings. You know, there was a lot of desolates. And so we looked up stuff and found that there was a whole idea of phantom galleries. So we pitched phantom galleries, and I'm on the bid, so I talked to the owners and said, let us be realty company for you, and we'll put some art up in it. And so we were able to get major anchor to come in. It was like the Norton Family Trust were the first people to come through and wanted to get a group of buildings. But we had a little kind of, the neighborhood wasn't quite ready for that much strength yet, but we got to test it out, you know, got to see that it in fact worked. Yeah. So we were able to fill 9 buildings, change the look of a neighborhood, engage the theater next door to make it where it's upgraded it, because it was just a desolate old building with homeless people in front of it.
Oh, really? Well, and now it's, how much money did you say?
They spent $12 million to just do the facade, you know. Yeah. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing. And then we also are engaging the green world. So we put together classes on that, and then to see how artists can do sculptures and design the area and all like that as an artist. So it's been fun, man. I just engage it in this, all the different ways that you can go, just try it out and see what can happen. And then that way you can send out strong youth. And we also go internationally. So one of the things that I did in '99, I went with Yogi Bhajan sent a group of black yoga teachers to go to Cuba. And he sent them to Cuba because that was really the place where all of Africans who were in the New World shook off the Middle Passage and got reprocessed and sent to other places. So he felt that there is a whole lot of cultural memory there that we could tap by talking to the Babalaos. And so we went and talked to the Babalaos there and had them talk about the presence of yoga in their culture. Because Yogi Bhajan, being from... Babalaos are like priests. Priests in the Yoruba culture. And Cuba practices it like no other place, better even than Africa, because what they've done is they throw their science in it. So I got to talk to physicists about tribal markings, and they're not tribal markings, they're really immunizations. you know, like acupuncture immunizations with herb in them,
Yeah.
you know. And so when you see a whole group of people having it, it's just like all of us who are,
Because the travel market.
yeah, we all have our little mark, and but they did it with where they would isolate and focus with tradition with the acupuncture points of the culture, you know. And of course, if you ask some of them, do they know what it is? They don't, because it's thousands and thousands of years of history that they're just following it by rote, you know. So, but with under the minds of a physicist, they looked at it and they wanted to see specifically what, you know, what's up with this, and so they were able to really study that. So we were able to talk to them that way. I found my trips to Cuba really, really, really wonderful, because it's the society when it comes to intellectualism and studying of medicines and stories and arts, they've thrown all their money into it. You know, the people may be poor, but the artists are very rich, and the intellectuals are very enriched, you know, because they can go as far as they want to. And the other thing that was a blessing with that culture to me is that they had an army of healers. They would train healers to go out, to go to places, not army guys. You know, they didn't ship out their arms only to Africa when they needed to fight against apartheid, but for the most part. And then even that, 300,000 soldiers to fight against apartheid, that's how many people they sent.
Yeah.
You know, I was really pretty amazed. I was like, wow, no wonder they're pissed at them. You know, that's like, I didn't have no idea that they had that many boots on the ground in South Africa and the Southern African Republic. So anyway, so that was our Cuban trip. So I'll show you this one. This is Los Moñuquitos. We got to meet them. And the thing that was fun about them is Los Moñuquitos are really from New Orleans. You know, they were a whole group that moved to New Orleans during the time.
You can't have any ego involved with your music. You're concerned that it penetrates the spirit in the right way.
No ves que cuando la echo me adelanto es pavo gobernando, oprimiendo el 100% cerebros enfermos que contaban con disparar palabras rebuscadas disfrazando el fraude. No se me aplaude porque miento menos que un profeta. Epa, ahora quiero que Medusa se entrometa. Papo récord.
It is something magical, spiritual. It's so intense that I can't even put it in words.
To all my homies in LA, you know how we do it out here. In Cuba, we doing our thing. We got me and Red right here. Me and Red. What's up? Hey. Taking our step footprints all around the world. Footprints around the world.
So this is inside here. Now, this has been a real interesting experience these last 18 years with these guys, because I've watched them go from their 20s to almost 40-something now. So the whole process of watching hip-hop get older and then working with their next generation of kids has been...
Minus the language barrier. Rhythms are rhythms, beats are beats. hip hop is our black urban youth slash rebellious interpretation of real life as we see it, characterized through the images of the street, all the way up to the images portrayed to us by Hollywood. Yeah, man.
So we ended up being the first group from the U.S. that really worked with the Cubans and stayed there with them, and we went there about 5 times in this kind of people-to-people cultural exchange. And
Were they about to come here as well?
yeah, they ended up coming here, but over a period of time. But once they were here, it's just a different thing. It's different to become an American. What they ran into was once you become an American, then a lot of your things like your apartment, you have to pay your rent. You have to, utilities are pretty heavy. You know, all the things that they had basically paid for by the state. School you have to pay for, you know. So it was, so I think the thing that I started seeing is once you kind of X off utilities and rent and not having to pay high price for your food, then you're almost talking a lot of your wage. So, you know, so if you then make about $200 to $400 a month, that's, you don't need that much more. So it kind of equalizes itself, and you don't have to pay for hospital bills at all. If you need your teeth done, you just get it done, you know. And then your kids, they can go to college as long as they can pass the test. They can go all the way to PhD as long as they can do it, you know. So the socialism was really kind of interesting. It's to me more bureaucratic because they're really hardcore bureaucrats, you know. So when we had to shoot there, I had to go through so many levels of communications that it was really, they were trying to shake me off, I think, in the sense of the bureaucracy, and I was more like taking notes. I'm like, damn, and I would go to the next place and I would be smiling, and they were like, why are you smiling? And I'm like, this is fun, you guys. You're sending me through all this shit. It was like, I'm learning. It's like, now what's the next step after this? What do I have to see? Because I'm excited. I liked your process because it's like,
Figure out the puzzle.
yeah, like DJ, we went to a theater. I mean, we went to a nightclub. And we talked to the owner, but they don't own it because it's owned by the state. Right. And so, but he said that we could put the DJ in at a certain time, and not knowing that the DJ's part of the state too. Oh, wow. So we came in and we set up our stuff, and said the owner said we could do it, and the guy's like, he doesn't have no right to do this, and threw all our shit away and started, you know, we almost got into a fight with him because we thought, but it was just, you know, when you're in the U.S., you talk to the owner, you know, who else do you talk to? But there you have to talk to the state. And so that was a little bit interesting, even for DJs. So they have everything really organized to umpteenth degree.
Go ahead.
Move a little different.
Yeah.
When we were setting up, you were talking about the Rodney King decision, and you know what it was like being here on the ground. What was your experience of that?
With Rodney King?
That moment, yeah.
Well, the very first thing that happened was we all couldn't, we thought that it was definitely going to be a guilty verdict. And so almost forgot about it. And so I got off work and my wife came and got me, and she told me that the Rodney King's guys who beat him were released, and we were like, what? And I just rambled throughout the city, you know. I ran around, and then we came here to our community, and people were really angry. It was really, 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 really angry. They were befuddled, just running around, just like not knowing almost what to do, but angry, angry, angry. And I think the icon for me was to see a young white kid get off on the corner here and was apologizing to everybody. And then people didn't care. They used him as you know, he pushed out, and I told him, don't go further south. I was like, don't go further south, man. And he got in and went further south, so that was really deep. So I don't know whatever happened to him, but he ended up at the wrong time in history to be in an all-black community. But I think he had the right attitude, because he was like, I'm sorry, man, this, even though it isn't my fault, but I'm sorry, that's the dumbest thing that this country could have ever done, you know. And so he dealt with it that way. So that was one of the icons for me. But then the next thing was the real paramilitary handling of it, because I just wondered about all the burning. And being in the military before, I just know you can't, you know, a building doesn't level in a couple hours. You know, it doesn't burn down to a rubble in a few hours, you know. So, and I think it would be like, if even myself, if I had to strike a fire inside a store and have it burn down, I wouldn't know how to really do it, you know. It's a hard thing to burn cement and hard floors, and then to make it where it's so combustible that it burns it, and burns it hard, you know, all the infrastructure and stuff. I mean, even if you threw gas around, it would just burn mostly the gas, you know. It wouldn't burn the whole building that fast, you know. I just can't see that. So I was noticing that as a real thing. It was really kind of strange. It was cathartic. A lot of people, and all the whole cultures, it wasn't just the black thing, it was a lot of people from Central America out here in the streets, and they were just as pissed off, and they were used to war zones, so they dealt with this pretty easily. Because I remember I was right here, and then I saw a couple of little ladies walking out in the midst of all of this, and I was like, Senorita, it's not a very good night to be doing this. And she says, son, all right, it's all right, it's all right. And then they went down there, and I saw them next, and they had a couple of smeared off containers, you know, not just the bottles, but just crates on top of their head, and they were taking this shit out. I was like, okay, go ahead on, y'all. I was like, so that was the kind of an indication of how it was just everybody. Everybody was pretty pissed, and everybody took advantage of what was happening there. And then the following days were even worse. I mean, people just really, there was anarchy. I'd never seen anarchy in full verge, but it was anarchy. People were throwing things through picture windows and along the way, grabbing shit in broad daylight. It was like just kicking in things, you know, and unless someone grabbed them and stopped them, you know. And we would stop them in places where we knew the people, you know, and stuff like that, but you couldn't do all of them. But so there was indiscriminate hitting sometimes, just boys being boys, you know, like with a bat, just hitting shit and stuff like that.
Were you worried about this place?
I was here guarding it. But people, for the most part, guarded it for me. And then we had another incident that was really interesting. We had a thing called the Black Gallery that had almost thousands and thousands of sculptures in it from Africa and all over the world. And the building next to it was in fire, and so everybody came from out of the residential neighborhoods and pulled them all out in the street and saved this place. It didn't burn, but then the following couple of days later, after pulling, they helped him pull everything out and then put everything in, and not one thing was stolen.
No way. Yeah.
You know, so it was almost like people were almost like automatons drawn towards saving those things. They just came in and helped him pull out all those things, because the fire looked like it was going to blow out that building. So things like that happened. The Korean family that was on the corner here, who still is here, they'll pull out they have a book, and they have a whole place burning, and it says, the black families helped me save my place. You know, it was black people. So they're proud to let people know that all of us did, you know, because I went by there and they say, stay off this, guys. These guys are cool, man. You just leave them alone, because they, you know, whereas the grocery store that went up, the 2 days before that, I saw him just knock somebody in the chest and say, get out of here, you know, that kind of stuff, just like really kind of evil stuff, you know, where you don't do that to a customer, you know.
Right.
You know, no matter what kind of customer, you know, grab them and hit them and stuff like that. And so the Koreans have a short just like Black Americans, and so it was pretty volatile with the two groups here. And I also had a insight with Koreans that's different than most people because they were my friends in Vietnam, you know, and Koreans are considered the black people of Asia. And so there was a kind of they would say me, you, same, GI, you know, they would deal with us in the same kind of cultural way that was really respectful and felt similarity, you know. Yeah. So I was telling all the black people here is they really feel like they're us. So that's part of the reason they migrated to our neighborhoods, because they also took care of us in Korea, because all the army soldiers and those guys dated them. And so they knew us in that way. So that's the reason that they're here. You know, and they know how to braid your hair because they braided the hair in Korea, you know, and they know how to take care of black hair and black bodies and the whole thing, which is kind of unusual. So they came here with a lot of skills and were able to undercut our market real well because it was outside money, you know. Sure. And so that's what I'm learning. I don't blame things on folks. I'm more of just like learning. So that was what even that uprising was about for us, is to for me, the police thing that happened a year later with the police trying to prove that they are powerful like this. And you know, I must not 100% blame it on the police, and this is what we ended up studying it with it, because I have this friend, Marcelina Morgan, that ended up doing a study on that time period for me. And what she found was it was Emmett Till again. It was the same thing that killed Emmett Till. It was us that killed it. We whispered, we did this passive-aggressive attitude about, like, did you see him honeying around with that white girl and saying it loud enough so the master could hear it? And they're like, what white girl? And find out that it was the grandfather that was hearing it. And then he tells his son, and he says, you know, he's around all those years, and he's up there doing this. And so that whisper came up to the point that it ended up killing a kid. It's the same thing that happened to us. Cell phones were just coming in, so, and gangbanging with our kids, and they all had hoods, and they're all men standing on the corner, and you saw how many of them there were. It's just like a lot of kids. So we emancipated the street, you know. That was what we were trying to do, because in the 80s, they all got fearful of the street because people were thinking drive-bys. But again, that was, you know, that's what happened here, was that it was the CIA agents came here to that theater and said that they caused all of that havoc in our neighborhood. They announced it, saying that it was, because it was a part of the problem. Imagine kids who don't have sense, like these cars, I mean, like the burning down of these buildings. One, they don't have that skill, you know. And then the second thing, who has exporting, importing capabilities from Central America and bringing in crack here? And they don't have no airplanes. They don't have any airplane skills. You know, nobody's bringing it in on the ground. They're not bringing boats through. How does it get here? Got here through the agents, you know. And they admitted it. And so this whole neighborhood, what we call, and some of the early studies by the guys from Martin Luther King, all the doctors, they were all saying that this whole gang thing was made up. And I know it's hard to believe, but the thing that they would say is just this, is like, you look at a gang and you look how internationally organized they are. Black churches aren't that well organized. And it's the most organized thing we have. And then, so how did these kids get all of this organizing skills all of a sudden? Out of prison? Come on. You know? And then the other thing is a military man is shooting, you know? When they were first killing who they shot at, and both of the people are moving, you can't transact. I mean, you have to be a super sniper to be moving and hit a moving object, you know. And you almost can't even do it with a machine gun, you know. So those are little things that came out in my brains that made me go, oh, this is a little bit different. So I'd ask the kids, when they were shooting, were they trying to hit him? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, and they were moving too? I'm like, wow, that's a little bit deep. Because in order to really do that, you have to shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of bullets to be able to be that much of a marksman, you know? And they don't have that much money. So all those things are the things that made me go, I don't have an answer for it, but it did make me go, I don't know what the answer is, but I know that it's more than just these guys here in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Did you film any of this as a filmmaker?
Of the uprising? No, I didn't. I was, I at that time viewed it almost like a birth. You know, I really thought it was like intruding on people while they were just getting cathartic energy out, and it was a time that, to me, I know most of my political friends couldn't understand it, but I'm just not that kind of person. I don't like shooting, because even homelessness, I was asked to do projects on that, and I can't shoot a mother scrambling in the last 5 hours, you know, to get her kids fed and find a place to sleep, and in a danky ass downtown in the first place. And so it doesn't push good buttons in me. And I don't even work in prisons. I hate working in prisons because I had a job on doing that, and I just can't last too long when people are in prison. I can't shoot people like in an animal state of being, and even if it helps them out of it, I can't put myself in that animal state of being to shoot them in that way. It's just, and so I rather just tell stories about it, because we will use a prison and tell a story about a person in prison, but to shoot a real live person that has to live through that whole degrading experience and to document them behind bars and stuff, I've never been able to really do that. You know? So that's my kind of foible. I'm not into doing that. So that's what happened with that. So, but what I ended up doing about it is I did do a piece, now that I think about it, I did a piece called Word, Sound, and Power, and I did it for Channel 28. And so my focus was then to show how powerful art was, you know, so that art places were the only place not attacked, you know, because we have a sense of working with the community. And then we made poems out of the stories, you know, made music out of it. And so that was how I dealt with it, is the whole idea of how we deal with compost and put flowers in it, you know. So that was more, again, how I dealt with it. And it's too nice of a way for some people because they wanted to see the dirt and grime of it all. But I tend not to tackle things that way. Because even with my story on I, that piece, it was about an African wind goddess coming to see her people. So that was what some of my friends would say, how come she's not dirty? She's not with a gun, revolutionary, dirty. I was like, that's not how I see her. She's a goddess, you know. So, so that's my differentness. And I used to always have a fight with a lot of the guys, because even if some of the guys who were call themselves revolutionaries and they would lie under like communism, and I would say, I don't like communism, and they were like, why? Well, like, I read the Communist Manifesto, and it said the lumpkin proletariat lives off the state, and that's my mama, you know. So how am I, you know, they're saying that that's the nastiness of the earth. And they're like, well, that's not really, but I'm like, that's what I read. You know, I don't know, you know, that you can say that he really didn't mean your mama, but that's what I read, you know. And so I don't see what's so good about that system. And then when I met communists, they were more bureaucratic and harder and not nice people, and they were very racist themselves. So I mean, I didn't see what was so good about that whole movement. And so I never aligned with it. And I've always like I said, I've always.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.